Colombia, Chile, and Peru are not going to the World Cup because this team is Ecuador. How? Welcome back to the series where we're previewing every single World Cup team. If you've missed the first 3 teams in Group A, well, congratulations. You've joined us at the 4th. The team from Pot 4, that is Ecuador. They're named that because they're on the equator. And while the name isn't creative, their team is very creative and pulled off a very surprising run to a rather comfortable finish at 4th in the South American qualifying section. For those that don't know, South American qualifying, absolutely savage. You play every other team in South America twice, home and away. It's 18 games. It happens over multiple years, and it's brutal because everybody down there isn't bad. Even Bolivia has altitude. How brutal is it exactly? Ecuador finished 4th. They only won 7 of their 18 games. As you might have guessed, they qualified because they made a brilliant start. They won 3 of their first 4 games back in 2020. A 4-2 win against Uruguay, a 3-2 win away to Bolivia, which is a lot harder than it seems because you basically need an oxygen tank on the field, and a 6-1 win against a Colombia team that was in complete disarray. That was the cornerstone, throwing a draw with Brazil towards the end, and they were able to cement their place in just their 4th ever World Cup. But Ecuador has actually been on kind of a hot streak. All 4 of those World Cups have happened since 2002. Ecuador was a stepping stone in South America for a long time. 2002, 2006, 2014, and now 2022. They've only made it out of the group stage once in this historical perspective on their World Cup participation, but in the last World Cup they made in 2014, they actually gave a really good go. They drew France in the group stage, but a loss to Switzerland sunk them, and they ended up with only 4 points. Despite the fact that this Ecuadorian team is coming off of a fabulous qualifying campaign that surprised everybody after their failure to make the 2018 World Cup, it hasn't shown in cup competitions either. For that, we have to look at their continental competition performance explosions. Ecuador flopped in 2019 at Copa America. This is a year after the World Cup they didn't qualify for. They finished last in a group that included Japan because why not? I mean, take a look at a map. It's right there in South America. Not the point, though. In 2021, they finished 4th in their group of 5. Fortunately, 4th is good enough to make it to the knockouts when you're talking Copa America groups because things get weird. And this is where we really start to learn what type of team Ecuador is, which is why you're really here. Just kidding. You're here for the forehead. I get it. But even though Ecuador finished 4th out of 5, they drew 3 of the 4 matches that they played. They lost the opening match to Colombia, which is ironic because, of course, they beat them 6-1 in qualifying, but they went on to draw everybody else in the group. And as you might have noticed, Brazil is in the group. Brazil's arguably the best team in the world. They're one of the 2 teams in history to qualify for the World Cup unbeaten in South America, and Ecuador drew them again, as I've already mentioned, in World Cup qualifying, also in the same 12-month span. This is a tough team that can play up to competition and is going to be able to give basically anyone a problem, except for Argentina in the quarterfinal of the Copa America, where they were brushed aside rather comfortably. Argentina, of course, went on to win the whole tournament. Lionel Messi cried, and everybody cried with him because awesome. But Ecuador had something to take home with them. They were going to the World Cup, or so they thought. Ecuador is in the World Cup now, but there was an appeal started by Chile, the team that finished there in World Cup qualifying, saying that Ecuador fielded an ineligible player. And I do a thing in each one of these videos where we have a player that is the one to look out for, and that is Byron Castillo. He was the player born near the Ecuadorian border in Colombia, at least according to what Chile had to say. FIFA reviewed the whole matter and eventually rejected the appeal. Upon further investigation, Byron Castillo was born on the Ecuadorian side of the border, even though he wasn't able to play in the national team for years before that investigation was completed. And honestly, if you'd asked me before researching all of this, I wouldn't have known there was a border between Ecuador and Colombia at all. This is not the only reason we're focusing on Byron Castillo. There are interesting players in this Ecuadorian team. Ener Valencia still exists. He was on the 2014 World Cup team. He's there. Excellent striker, and you will see him probably bag at least 1 goal in this World Cup. There's also, of course, Pervis Estupiñán. There's Moises Caicedo, the rising star at Brighton. But Byron Castillo's great, and you probably haven't heard of him, so he works perfectly for this. Once they confirmed that he was actually Ecuadorian, the right back has now been a staple of the national team. He's been playing at Barcelona for 5 years, the one in Ecuador. He just recently moved to Mexican side Lyon, and honestly, I think he's one of the best players in the national team, despite the European ability that Ecuador has. He's so talented going forward as a right back that against Paraguay in the second to last qualifying match of World Cup qualifying, they played him at right wing in a 4-2-3-1. And given the fact that the left side of the field is often stacked for Ecuador, Byron Castillo is going to be absolutely key to creating everything on the right flank. And if he plays his cards right, he looks like one of the prime candidates to explode and all of a sudden get a move to Europe off of an excellent World Cup performance, especially out of Group A where everything's wide open because your pot 1 team is Qatar. But that look Ecuador threw at Paraguay in World Cup qualifying is one of many looks that we could see from Ecuador in the World Cup. When I'm breaking down what formations these teams are going to use at the World Cup, I look at their past important competitive matches. Honestly, Ecuador seems to use a different formation in almost every single one. The most common is a 4-3-3, and we've seen this go a couple of ways, but their most recent important competitive match against Argentina, it was a 4-3-3 with a very strong left. Estupiñán, who's got great talent and flair at left back, Moises Caicedo, who is an engine with the ability to break the press on the left side of the midfield. And then they also have had Ener Valencia play at that left wing spot as well. It's like tilting the field. Your talent is all on one side. Then in a 1-1 draw against Peru, they break out a 4-4-1-1, and everything looks different. Gustavo Alfaro likes to keep the opponent guessing, and Ecuador's tactic entirely depends on matchup, but it does have a weakness that will affect their ability to advance forward in the competition. For me, that is the goalkeeping position. They have the same goalkeeper they had at the World Cup in 2014. His name is Dominguez, but Dominguez might not actually be the starter. The last really important competitive match, Hernan Galindez was the starting goalkeeper, and he plays in the Ecuadorian League. And it is tough to go from that standard to the standard required to play at the World Cup, and they don't seem to know exactly who their goalkeeper is going to be. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Dominguez or Galindez. But don't doubt the other guys from the Western Hemisphere. There are a lot of good players, Byron Castillo included, that are in this team that are playing in Mexico or somewhere in South America, and they do have talent. Something I consider important, they've got guys with major high-level European experience on every level. Hincapie at center back plays for Bayer Leverkusen, of course Moises Caicedo in the middle, and Ener Valencia is as experienced at this level as you're going to find. Copa America and South American World Cup qualifying are as difficult, high pressure, and fan intensive as any competitions you will find in the world. Ecuador has found a way to thrive in those environments with a team that is considered less talented. Ecuador has a lot of time to put together their scouting report to come up with what is essentially a matchup tactic for each opponent, and they've done that very well over the course of the last couple competitions, with one exception, Argentina. And honestly, their last qualifying match, they even found a way to draw the team that blew them out in Copa America. So this Ecuador team can hold anybody to a stalemate. They can survive the Netherlands. They have the quality and creativity to beat Qatar as long as they don't slip up. And in that decisive game against Senegal, I think Ecuador is able to find a winning edge because of their supreme fullback play. I know one thing for sure, though. I'm going to love watching Group A. If you want to see how Ecuador matches up with this Senegalese team, my video on Senegal is right here. And that is clickable right there.